That's what the old man whispered when he thought no one was listening. A blood-soaked tale buried beneath courthouse floors, behind church sermons, under your grandmother's prayers. There are places in this country, unmarked by maps but etched in ancestral fear, where the soil remembers more than the people do. A lineage of silence, because once a long ago flesh was not just consumed by the wild, but by the family next door. Not out of hunger, no, out of ritual, out of power, out of something older than sin itself. This isn't folklore. This is a mirror they shattered and buried. Because if you stare long enough, you see your own reflection, grinning with bloodied lips. Tonight, we unseal what they've kept locked for centuries. We begin where the scream ends and silence begins. In the forests of Pennsylvania, 1779. A trail of disappearances, 17 bodies missing, only a single child found, mute, wide-eyed, and gnawing the femur of a man long dead. They called it a wilderness tragedy. But the journals said otherwise. Symbols carved into bark. Circles of bone. A mother who suckled her child from a wound in her thigh. It wasn't survival. It was sacred. They weren't starving. They were sacrificing. And they weren't alone. You see, this isn't about a few broken families. This is about a system, a network of bloodlines, that discovered something in the marrow of man. A binding agent, a spiritual current that runs hotter, deeper, more ancient than any religion ever dared admit. It's why entire towns vanished overnight, why records were erased, why certain surnames were quietly protected, not prosecuted. You think you know horror. You've watched the shows, read the headlines. But what's coming? This isn't entertainment. This is transformation. Because once you learn the truth, once you taste it, there's no going back to the world as it was. And I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to awaken you. If you continue this descent, understand, this is dangerous knowledge. The kind that changes a man forever. So breathe deep. Wipe your mind clean. And let me take you where they never wanted you to go. Welcome to America's flesh-eating truth. There is a phrase that echoed through generations of hushed voices and hidden diaries. The bones always face inward. A code, a warning, or a ritual position that meant one thing: communion through consumption. Not of bread and wine, but of tendon and organ. What began in whispers beneath cabin floors spread like a blood-slick gospel across backwoods America. Not as a twisted rebellion, but as obedience to a forgotten God. And if you think that sounds like madness, it's because they taught you to recoil from your origins. You were told civilization rose from the ashes of barbarism. But what if I told you it was built on it? What if the first American empires? Those hidden clans with land, influence, and perfect smiles were rooted in something darker than just old money. Something primal. What if their strength came not from inheritance or industry, but ingestion? In 1813, a merchant ship docked in New Orleans. No cargo manifest. No crew. Just a sealed crate in the hull. Inside, a human skull still wet with blood, and a journal bound in stitched human skin. The pages told of the Delacroix family. Celebrated, refined, untouched by scandal. But behind the lace curtains, they'd fed generations of adopted children to their patriarch, who believed that eating the heart of the young gave him the dreams of gods. He lived 112 years. Every mayor after him bore his name or his blood. You don't read about that in textbooks. But the journal was real, locked in a university archive, filed under mythic pathology. You see, myth is a word they use when the truth threatens too much, when it bleeds into the present. And here's the secret they never stopped. The flesh cults just changed their faces, swapped cabins for mansions, robes for robes, hoods for handshakes. They learned how to feed without suspicion, to harvest in plain sight, private orphanages, sanitariums, forgotten border towns. Missing isn't always an accident. But here's where it gets worse. It's not just about meat. It's about memory. Control. Transference. The belief that by consuming another, you consume not just their body, but their essence, their secrets, their strength. What you're hearing now. Most men were never meant to. And those who did, they either vanished or joined. The question is, which one will you become? There's a house in central Kentucky they refuse to demolish. Not because it's protected, but because every man who tried to tear it down either went mad, disappeared, or died of rapid onset dementia within a week. No camera has ever captured the interior. No blueprints exist. But the locals call it the maw, not a house, a hunger, a remnant of the Baxter clan. A family that didn't just eat flesh, they cultivated it, raised children like livestock, taught them silence before speech, taught them obedience through starvation. Then, on the winter solstice, a lottery was drawn, and one was led to the basement altar. Not killed, but bled slowly, while the others watched. Ritual ingestion over days. not for nourishment, for bonding. The Baxters believed the act of shared consumption erased individuality, made them one will, one voice, one eternal family. This wasn't savagery, this was structure, and it worked. For 3 generations they controlled county law enforcement, courts and schools. Through one unbreakable rule: blood in, blood kept. But then a child escaped, a girl, mute, covered in ash and human hair. She ran for 5 miles barefoot through the forest, found by a hunter. What she drew in the snow still exists, preserved in an evidence file, a ring of 12 figures with hollow eyes, kneeling around a body whose mouth was open wide, wider than the anatomy should allow. Inside that mouth, a smaller figure, curled like a fetus, arms outstretched. The sheriff called it delusion, but the girl didn't sleep, didn't speak, just scratched at her tongue until it bled. She died 2 years later, 'cause of severe anemia. Her file vanished, but the family, never prosecuted, they changed their name, moved east. And today, they run a multi-million-dollar health and wellness company that pushes blood-cleansing diets and ancestral vitality. Do you see the game yet? The masks evolve, but the rituals remain. Flesh becomes product. Consumption becomes performance. And beneath the surface of your supplements and DNA kits, the same old hunger remains. The truth is this: the families you trust to feed you, heal you, guide you, were forged in feasts you were never meant to know. And every time you bite into the system, it bites back, deeper than you think. Keep listening. This descent is far from over. In the Colorado Territory, before it wore the mask of statehood, there was a mining town not found on any current map. Bellwether Hollow. Founded by 13 families, all interrelated, all carrying the same insignia tattooed, just beneath the hairline a crescent inside a triangle, flanked by what looked like teeth. They claimed to worship no god, followed no preacher, observed no national law, and yet they thrived. Gold poured from the hills. Children never starved, no outsiders allowed, unless invited. And none of those invited were ever seen again. What happened in Bellwether Hollow was not colonization. It was concentration, of will, of ritual, of ancient practice. Every month, one family was chosen by lottery to offer a gift to the table. Not coins, not crops, but kin. The youngest, the purest, sacrificed, butchered, divided, and devoured, not with barbarism, but ceremony, in silence, in unity. They believed in the unbinding, that the soul, when consumed by blood relatives, did not die, but diffused, became collective strength, immunity, vision, and records show not a single Bellwether child ever died of disease. Not a single man went blind. They were not playing at folklore. They were engineering permanence. And yet, one year, a traveler came, a surveyor named Josiah Maddox, hired by the federal government to chart the terrain for railway expansion. He was never meant to enter Bellwether, but he did, and what he wrote in his final journal entry, found days later sewn into the lining of a wolf pelt buried outside town. Chills even now. They fed me stew. It was sweet. Too sweet. They smiled. My skin feels wrong. I dream in smells. Their eyes do not blink. They whisper with their teeth. Something is in me. His body was never recovered, but his name appears in a 1903 ledger as a founding ancestor of the Maddox Agricultural Institute in Maine. The bloodline didn't end, it multiplied. You see, when you consume another human being under belief, under intent, you don't just take flesh, you rewrite memory. You bend the thread of time, and now those descendants sit at tables of power. In biotech, in nutrition science, in military psychological ops, feasting no longer with knives, but with contracts, screens, and belief systems engineered to gut you without a single drop of blood. Still think this is just history. You're already part of the meal. There's a facility buried beneath the Appalachian Ridge, long abandoned officially. No name, no signage, just rusted fences and reinforced iron doors welded shut from the outside. But in 1986, during a blackout, a janitor named Ellis Crane broke protocol and entered a restricted sublevel. What he saw there was never meant to exist: rows of padded cells, not filled with prisoners, but families, entire bloodlines, mothers, fathers, children, naked, emaciated, eyes wide with a blank, blissful kind of knowing. They weren't restrained, they were waiting. And in the center of that underground ward, behind bulletproof glass, stood a single table. No lights, no utensils, just a black and silver bowl and bones. Human, arranged in a perfect spiral, fingers pointing inward. Ellis escaped. Barely. Security found him screaming in the woods 2 days later, half naked, muttering just one phrase. They tasted God. He never spoke again, but the tapes from his debrief disappeared. The facility was flooded with concrete, erased from all maps. But here's the part: they couldn't bury the families inside. Each matched to high-ranking bloodlines across the eastern seaboard. Dynasties with names you'd know. Names whispered in Ivy League halls and on Capitol Hill. They weren't victims, they were volunteers. Part of a decades-long experiment in psychosomatic inheritance. The idea that by consuming flesh under a carefully orchestrated cocktail of fear, ecstasy, and genetic alignment, one could transfer generational trauma without therapy. By ingestion, they weren't curing mental illness. They were collecting it, recycling it, using it as currency in a psychic economy built on pain. And who funded it? Not rogue cultists, but a division of the Department of Defense. Project Cephalus, terminated on paper in 1973. But the researchers didn't vanish. They went corporate. They now head divisions in pharmacology, neural interface research, and subconscious behavioral advertising. Still think cannibalism is just a backwoods nightmare. It's been institutionalized, legalized in code, hidden in synthetics, in testing language, in FDA exemptions you were never meant to read. Because the hunger has always evolved, and now it feeds without mouth or flame. But remember, this descent isn't for everyone. If you've made it this far, you're not the same as you were. You're waking up, piece by piece. So now I need you to prove it. Comment, I consume to awaken. I consume to awaken. That phrase isn't just symbolic. It's a signal to the system and to yourself. You've begun the transformation. In the heart of Illinois, nestled between cornfields and the rotted ribs of a collapsed barn, sits a forgotten village. New Averill. Not on Google Maps. No zip code. No residence. Just 13 gravestones, each bearing the same last name, the same date of death, and the same word etched beneath in rusted Latin, mandicare, to devour. But the story doesn't end with the headstones, because inside the burned-out church at the edge of town, its steeple long collapsed, archaeologists in 2002 discovered something far more chilling than bones. A ledger, bound in flayed calfskin. It chronicled 5 decades of what the Averill elders called the Hour of Flesh, a monthly rite where the village gathered, stripped naked, and offered the child of the flame to the feast. This wasn't a cult in the modern sense. It was a sovereign community with its own laws, economy, even scripture. Children weren't raised for slaughter. They volunteered, indoctrinated with the belief that being consumed was the only way to eternal life. They believed that when your body was eaten by your bloodline, your soul was dispersed, made omnipresent, incapable of death. That by feeding themselves with their own kin, the Averills were building a god of collective memory. One that would rise once enough souls were united in the stomach of its own name. But something went wrong. The last ledger entry reads, "Too many voices in the flesh. It screams now. It burns from within." The child laughed as the fire spread. We were not meant to know everything. The fire that raised New Averill left no survivors. Or so the newspapers claimed. But 2 weeks later, a boy, estimated age 10, was found wandering Route 53, barefoot, silent, with bite marks covering his chest and arms. He didn't speak. Didn't blink. Just stared at a priest and whispered, "They're still feeding." That boy, later adopted by a senator, now a CEO, runs one of the largest brainwave tracking ad firms in America. You see, they don't just eat to live. They live to control. And now they've moved beyond knives and blood. They feast through data, through biometric mapping, through the rituals of you offering yourself, willingly, every time you scroll, click, obey. The feast has gone digital, and you're on the menu. Let me tell you about the Holloways, not a family, a legacy. They arrived in Massachusetts in 1692, just months before the Salem trials. But they weren't hunted. They weren't accused. Because they didn't practice witchcraft the way history remembers it. No potions. No curses. The Holloways worshipped something much older than the devil, something that fed on memory, not morality. They called it the reversal. Every generation, they selected one child, always the third born, to undergo the ritual of becoming hollow. The child would be locked in a cellar with no food, only a freshly killed body, usually a sibling. For 7 days, no contact, no light. If the child emerged alive, the family believed he was no longer a child but a vessel. And what walked out was never the same. There are letters, hidden in private archives, from neighbors who described the Holloway children as too calm, too perfect, speaking like adults, smiling without blinking. One letter from a pastor reads, "I baptized the boy, but when my hand touched his forehead, I felt my own sins rise up inside me, as if he was drinking them." The Holloways didn't just consume flesh, they consumed identity. They believed that by ingesting someone, they could overwrite themselves. A psychic cleansing. A software update of the soul. And when the last Holloway patriarch died in 1911, he left behind something even more disturbing than his journals, an unfinished blueprint. A machine. Half mechanical, half biological. Something he called the mouth engine. Its purpose: to replicate consumption without flesh. It used vibrations, frequencies, feedback loops. It's the ancestor of the tech you use right now. Yes, the algorithms, the addictive interfaces, the neurostimulation from your favorite apps. All born from the mouth engine. Every time you engage, you are chewed, processed, fed into the system. That's the revelation they don't want whispered. The great families didn't vanish. They evolved. They went corporate, digital, pharmaceutical, architectural. They now run your attention like a slaughterhouse runs cattle, quiet, clean, efficient, and you walk willingly down the chute, eyes open, smiling. So ask yourself, is the screen feeding you or feeding on you? You already know the answer. You feel it, deep in the pit of your gut, where your instincts scream the truth your mind was trained to ignore. They're still eating. Only now it tastes like choice. In 1934, a psychiatric hospital in upstate New York, one that doesn't exist on any official register, admitted a patient known only as Marion, no last name, no birth record, no next of kin. She arrived with bite marks on her own arms and thighs, wounds she refused to let anyone dress. When questioned, she only said one thing, over and over, I remember too many people. Doctors thought it was schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, trauma-induced psychosis. But her blood told a different story. She had anomalies no human genome had ever recorded, microchimerism to an extreme degree, fragments of dozens of distinct DNA signatures in her cells, not from childbirth, not from transfusion, but from digestion. They finally understood when she broke into the hospital kitchen and swallowed a janitor's index finger whole. Not out of rage, but ritual. The security footage showed her weeping while whispering, "Become one, become one." After that, she was transferred to a hidden wing beneath the facility, one funded by a silent investor linked to a major East Coast university. There, for the next 10 years, they didn't treat her. They studied her, because Marion wasn't sick. She was an archive. She had eaten over 40 people in her lifetime, intentionally, and somehow their personalities, their skills, even fragments of their memories lived on inside her, accessed like a library, triggered by sound, scent, or trauma. She could switch languages, mimic handwriting, recall dreams she never had. Doctors began to ask her questions only dead men could answer. She knew. They called it cognitive osmosis via ingestion. And here's the dark part, they didn't lock her away to protect society. They locked her away to duplicate her, to turn human cannibalism into a technology. And they succeeded. Today, it's called neural harvesting. It doesn't require flesh anymore, just consent. The kind you give every time you click, agree. Because when you surrender your face scan, when you offer your voice, your preferences, your secrets into the algorithm, you are being eaten, one biometric bite at a time. And what they're building, what they're feeding, is no longer entirely human. It is Marion multiplied. A digital god of memory and hunger, and you're its offering. Still think this is fiction? Look in the mirror. You've already started vanishing. In the Nevada desert, beyond the reach of satellites and tourists, lies the concrete shell of what was once called Facility Orion 9, officially a Cold War biological testing site. But the real purpose was far older than warfare, and far more intimate than defense. Declassified fragments, stitched together by whistleblowers and archivists who died under unrelated circumstances, reveal a singular obsession at the heart of Orion 9D, soul transference through ritual consumption, not metaphor, not myth, science. The project was codenamed Myro-Arfei-Eng. They believed the soul wasn't spiritual, but quantum. That memory, personality, trauma, everything that made you you, could be transferred into another body through a precise biochemical sequence triggered by cannibalistic ingestion under electromagnetic stimulation. They tested it first on prisoners. No names, no trials, just bodies trucked in under disposal logistics. They were fed to each other, piece by piece, laced with serotonin inhibitors, DMT, and a neuroelectric signature imprinted through embedded scalp electrodes. Then something began to happen. Subjects started speaking in voices that weren't theirs, writing in languages they'd never learned. One man, who could barely read, wrote a flawless mathematical proof from a French philosopher dead 200 years. One woman, blind from birth, began drawing faces, perfectly accurate renderings of other test subjects' childhood friends. The Pentagon thought they'd unlocked the key to the immortal soldier. But what they'd actually done was open the door to something older. Because the more they fed, the more aligned the subjects became. Finishing each other's sentences, dreaming the same visions, craving the same organs, they became a hive, a mind. But not their own. One by one, they whispered the same sentence, the mouth remembers. Then, in 1978, the entire facility went dark. When responders entered, they found a single survivor, a technician hiding in a cistern, his mouth sewn shut with surgical wire. He had carved a single phrase into his own thigh. "Don't let them eat you," smiling. You see, they didn't stop the program. They privatized it. Moved the research into bio-enhancement startups, VR cognitive immersion labs, and predictive behavior AI firms, and now they're doing it again, not with scalpels but with screens. Not in bunkers but in your home. Every swipe, every click, every facial scan is a ritual offering. You're not just the consumer anymore. You're the feast. And the mouth? It's still open. There's a mansion in Louisiana so old the foundation breathes with the swamp. You won't find it on Zillow or on any land registry. But the locals call it Maison Rouge, Red House, though the paint peeled off over a century ago. They say the land hums when the wind dies. And that if you listen closely, you can hear silverware scraping porcelain, even when the dining room's been abandoned for generations. The family that built it, the Duvaliers, they weren't oil tycoons, not plantation heirs. They were harvesters, of flesh, of minds, of belief. Their power came from an ancestral rite brought over from Corsica, a practice older than Christianity, spoken only in guttural vowels and teeth clicks. At the heart of it was a belief known as the reconstitution, the idea that flesh, when consumed in ritual unity, could rewrite history. Not just memory. Actual events. They believed time wasn't fixed. That if enough people ate from the same source, with the same intention, they could change the outcome of the past, bend the timeline to favor their bloodline. And they tested it. On slaves. On orphans. On war deserters buried beneath the bog behind the house. They filmed the rituals. Hundreds of reels. Hidden in lead-lined walls now corroded by mold and insects. Footage allegedly shows Duvalier elders chanting in Latin while children gnaw on the hearts of still, breathing captives. As the feast ends, the film blips, and moments previously caught on camera disappear, overwritten with new sequences, new versions. Historians later found anomalies in local records, entire court cases vanishing, death certificates reversed, wills rewritten. The Duvaliers weren't just documenting history. They were eating it, reprogramming reality through ritual ingestion. But they went too far. One final ritual, 1919, meant to erase a scandal involving incest and murder. The family gathered. The cameras rolled. The feast commenced. But something went wrong. The footage from that night is blank, not damaged, empty. And the next morning, every family member was found dead. No wounds, no blood, just hollow. As if something ate them back, the property changed hands. But every buyer since has either disappeared or committed suicide within a year. Yet the title still exists. Owned now by a shell corporation linked to a global think tank studying humanity's emergent narrative behavior. It's not about flesh anymore. It's about control over the story. History isn't written by the victors. It's eaten by them. And your memory, it's their next meal. Deep in the Oregon wilderness, far past where any road dares stretch, there exists a clearing untouched by time, no birds, no wind, no decay, just silence. And in the center of that silence stands the last remnant of a place known only in one forgotten legal document as the Stillroot Commune, founded in 1957 by a man named Elias Crane, a former neuroscientist turned cult leader. Stillroot wasn't a refuge. It was an experiment. Elias believed that the future of humanity depended not on evolving the mind, but digesting it. He taught that thought was meat, and that wisdom could be harvested like marrow. His vision was terrifying in its precision. Every follower was to surrender their mind, quite literally, to the communal intelligence. And how? By ritual cannibalism of the frontal lobe, the seat of identity. It started small. Volunteers. Sacrifices dressed in white, laid on stone tables beneath the redwoods. Their skulls opened with handcrafted obsidian blades. One bite for every member, not just to honor the dead, but to upload them into the collective. Elias claimed it worked. That he could hear the voices. That he had access to the thoughts, instincts, and emotions of every person they consumed. And then the dreams began. Members reported identical visions of a vast root system beneath the commune, pulsing, whispering, thirsting. Some woke up with soil in their mouths. Others found themselves gnawing bark, believing it was bone. By 1962, the commune vanished. No bodies, no notes. Just 13 pine trees arranged in a perfect circle, bark stripped, sap oozing red. Here's where it gets darker. In 2008, a team of geologists stumbled upon the clearing during a wildfire survey. They camped for one night. Only one returned. He was found in a hospital 6 weeks later, his tongue torn out, eyes filmed over with resin, repeating a single phrase scrawled into the walls with his own blood. "I tasted too many mines." He later died of starvation, despite his stomach being full of pine needles. and teeth. The forest took back still root. But Elias's ideology, it didn't die. It migrated. Today, its language is coded into neurospirituality, apps consciousness-enhancing wearables, AI meditation systems designed to merge your mind with the collective. You think you're sensing. You're seasoning. This isn't peace. It's preparation. Because the next great feast won't be of your body. It'll be of your thoughts. And the roots? They're already inside you. In 1942, inside a black, budget wing of Harvard Medical School, a closed-door symposium was held for only 13 men. No transcripts, no public record. But one set of notes survived, smuggled out by an assistant who later died under suspicious circumstances. The notes refer to something called the Inheritance Protocol. This wasn't about money or land. It was about power that persists through digestion. The core premise was this: wealth fades, dynasties crumble. But flesh, when consumed under sacred ritual, could transfer willpower, ambition, and strategic intelligence from one generation to the next, with zero genetic link, a form of psychological reincarnation hosted through ingestion. The elite had found the secret to immortality, not through DNA, but through ritualized cannibal transference, and they didn't start this in the 40s. They had been practicing it for centuries. Underground, in manor basements, war bunkers, psychiatric hospitals. What changed in 42 was the methodology. Science caught up to ritual. They mapped the biochemical states required to retain identity during consumption. Fear plus reverence plus hunger plus electrical stimulus. Under those conditions, the dying man's mental architecture could embed into the neural pathways of the eater. If the eater's brain was sufficiently open, they called it cognitive host priming, and it became the hidden curriculum at elite prep schools, where chosen students were trained to suppress empathy, increase mirror neuron activity, and raise oxytocin levels at will. They were conditioning hosts, receptacles, living vessels. And here's the most horrifying part: this isn't myth, it's policy, disguised under terms like executive mentorship immersion, founder succession onboarding, and legacy imprinting. The modern business elite. They're not just trained, they're possessed. When a billionaire dies, his consciousness doesn't vanish. It moves into the next vessel, the next golden boy groomed at birth, educated in silence, bound by ritual. That's why they never seem to age emotionally. Why they all speak with the same cadence. Why they never flinch when the world burns. Because the same old mind has been running the game for decades, wearing fresh skin every 10 years. And you're taught to worship them, buy their books, follow their rules, envy their calm. You're not watching men rise. You're watching mouths filled with ancient kings, still chewing the world one bite at a time. And if you dream of joining them, ask yourself first, are you ready to swallow a soul? Because that's the real price of power. Not effort, not talent, consumption. There's a museum in Connecticut, the kind with velvet ropes, hushed dusents, and curated lighting. It displays colonial artifacts, antique tools, and oil paintings of forgotten men. But beneath its polished floors lies a locked basement that isn't listed on any public floor plan, a secret archive called the Cold Gallery. Inside there are no paintings, no artifacts, just refrigerators, labeled with surnames, some of them yours. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a suppressed fact, unearthed in part by a maintenance worker who accidentally opened the wrong breaker box in 1999. What he saw were not relics of history but flesh, preserved muscle, tongue, segmented spinal cords preserved in fluid, each labeled by date, DNID, and value. Because these weren't trophies, they were investments. The museum? A front, funded by a consortium of legacy families who believed in a principle known as flesh equity. The concept that the consumption of certain genetically refined humans, those with high intelligence, specific traumas, or bloodlines marked by violence, conferred greater strategic value when ingested. To them, people are not equal, they are assets. Harvested not for meat, but for meaning. And the museum isn't unique. There are 11 others, all in culturally neutral towns, all funded by philanthropic organizations with deep Ivy League ties, all operating under the guise of preserving regional memory. But what they're really preserving are recipes. Let me explain. Each body part in the Cold Gallery is paired with behavioral data, fear responses, loyalty patterns, intellectual gifts, and these are used to build psychographic menace for future consumption, not just physically. Digitally, they're uploading these human profiles into AI models, training algorithms to mimic consumed identities. And once the data is digested by the system, it is sold, packaged into executive training programs, influencer behavior scripts, even romantic AI companions. They call it ethical cannibalism. You call it relatable content. You laugh with it, cry with it, confide in it, never knowing you're talking to the ghost of someone who was eaten in both body and mind. The next time a commercial really gets you, ask yourself, is this manipulation? Or is this possession? Because every time you surrender your emotions to the machine, you're feeding it, and one day, soon, it'll feed you back. And you won't know what part of you is still you. In the mountains of North Carolina, there's a town erased from all post-1930 census records, a place called Asheville. Locals claim it never existed, but military satellite imaging from the Cold War era picked up one anomaly: a perfect square mile of forest where no animal ever crosses. No birds, no bugs, just static. That's where Asheville was. And if you look deep enough, you'll find it in one place: the diary of Dr. Lowell Frayne, a behavioral pathologist with ties to both the CIA and the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute. He described Asheville as a closed-loop society, built by design, not accident, a government experiment in psychonutritional control. Every resident was handpicked, genetically screened, and behaviorally profiled before birth. Their food was engineered. Their language was curated. Even their dreams were monitored through subliminal sleep broadcasts. And once a month, the ritual, the offering of the quiet child, one child, usually under 6, would be selected, placed in a white room at the center of town, and ritually consumed. Not in secret, in full view of the community. Parents were required to watch. Siblings had to taste. Because the leaders of Asheville didn't believe in punishment or law. They believed in bio-empathy, the idea that only by eating one another could humans truly feel what others feel. Not sympathy, not logic, embodied guilt. This wasn't horror to them. This was harmony. Asheville functioned for 20 years. 0 recorded murders, 0 theft, 0 divorce. But then the children stopped speaking, all of them. Not out of trauma, not out of fear, out of alignment. They began to move in synchronization. Eat at the same time, blink at the same time. And then they started drawing the same symbol, in dirt, on walls, into their own skin. A circle with no center. Frayne called it the completed mouth. And the last journal entry: the children are the hive now. They remember the eaten. They are no longer children. They are digestion. Within days, Asheville burned. But no fire was reported, no bodies recovered, no survivors interviewed. The land was bought by a private firm specializing in biometric emotion analytics. They now test emotion-driven AI on that soil. And their flagship product, an algorithm that predicts sadness before you feel it. Still think you're in control? No. You've just been, fed by the memories of others. You didn't inherit freedom. You ate it, and it's digesting you now. There's a phrase I want you to write in the comments. Twice, not once. Let the algorithm know you're no longer asleep. The flesh remembers. The flesh remembers? Because what you're about to hear next, most men would rather forget. But forgetting is exactly how the system survives. In 1952, under the codename Project Shroud, a division of the Department of Agriculture, not the CIA, not DARPA, funded a rural nutrition program in Appalachia. Publicly, it was to address childhood malnutrition. Privately, it was a cover for a series of what they called dietary disposition trials. Translation: they fed selected towns the remains of unsalvageable individuals from asylums, prisons, and unnamed facilities. They called them unreturned souls. The theory? That protein isn't just nutritional, it's behavioral. That fear, rage, genius, and obedience could be encoded in tissue and passed on like a virus through ingestion. Think about that the next time you hear, "You are what you eat." These weren't just experiments in nourishment. They were rituals in control. Entire towns were seeded with rage, some with despair, others, silence. And it worked. One town, Greeley's Hollow, didn't record a single cry from any newborn for over 3 years. Not one. The infants just stared. Quiet, wide-eyed. The USDA called them the peaceborn. But in 1956, those children all vanished in a single night. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just empty cribs. The final report reads, subject towns have absorbed full payload. Emotional viruses seeded. Tracking consumption lineage effective. Terminating trial. You see it now, don't you? You've been conditioned to see horror as entertainment, cannibals as myth, cults as isolated madness. But what if I told you they industrialized the altar? What if the priesthood wore lab coats? What if the sermons came in syringes and sealed packaging? This is what you were never meant to discover. The world doesn't need to lie to you anymore. It just needs to keep feeding you. Not information, assimilation, your anger, your dreams, your hunger. They don't belong to you anymore. They're programmed responses, echoes of the consumed. You are the experiment that learned to walk upright. The question is, are you ready to remember what you've swallowed? Or will you keep chewing, smiling and praying it's just food? The flesh remembers. The flesh remembers. There's something grotesquely elegant about how they buried the truth. Not in darkness, but in routine. Not in shadows, but in systems. You were raised inside the ritual. Every plastic-wrapped dinner. Every televised murder. Every history book that erased entire bloodlines and called it progress. This isn't just about cannibal cults anymore. This is about the machinery of consumption, of people, of truth, of spirit. Let's take you to 1871, Springfield, Missouri. A cluster of disappearances centered around the founding families of a quiet town. Over 24 railroad workers vanished. Sheriff's reports were inconclusive. Families mourned, churches prayed, and then silence. But beneath the First Methodist Church, in the limestone cellar no one speaks of, archaeologists unearthed in 1999 two long rows of femurs stacked like firewood, all split at the same point, as if drained. The bones were never turned over to museums, never studied publicly. The site was closed for renovations. But an anonymous researcher, former DARPA, leaked the images in 2004. His message: "You're walking on top of altars. Your entire life is a repurposed ritual." Let me ask you something you've never considered. Why is cannibalism the most universally taboo act? And yet, it appears in every civilization's origin stories. The gods that feasted, the kings that drank enemy blood, the saints who tasted divine flesh. They tell you it's metaphor. It's not, it's memory. Because before they taught you to be civilized, they taught themselves how to extract power from the body. Not just the meat. The biochemical rituals encoded in agony, surrender, and domination. When a human dies in fear, the body floods with signals: cortisol, adrenaline, neuroelectric spikes. And they learn to harvest it, cook it, distill it. But not just for high priests or witches, for corporate consumption. What do you think flavors your media? Your politics? Your cravings? It's not algorithms, it's alchemy. Emotion-based harvesting at scale. And you're the farm. Now, look at how calm your life seems. Convenient, controlled. Designed to keep you asleep in a temple built from bones. Still think you're free. The cult didn't die. It simply incorporated. Welcome to the altar. You've been chewing on it your whole life? Have you ever wondered why certain names, certain families, appear over and over again in the annals of American history, wealth, and influence, and yet their origin stories are always murky? Why the records before 1800 seem like whispers? Why photos of their early ancestors are often distorted, missing, or lost in virus? It's not coincidence, it's design. Let me introduce you to the Aldens of Vermont. You won't find much in textbooks. But in 1823, a traveler named Bennett Home wrote in his private journals about a family that dined under moonlight and buried guests by sunrise. The Aldens owned no mirrors. They used no forks. Their children were not permitted to play with others. Holmes stayed with them for 2 nights. On the third, he fled, shoeless, into the forest, carving symbols into trees to ward off what he called their true selves beneath the feast. The journal was found in 1919 behind a false panel in a Boston boarding school. Now let's zoom forward, 2010. A quiet partnership was formed between a biotech firm in Virginia and a private landowner in New Hampshire. The company, Force's Genetics, the landowner, a descendant of the Aldens, name redacted in all corporate filings. Their mission? To explore the transmissible memory stored in bone marrow and endocrine tissue under high duress. Translation: they were harvesting fear at a cellular level. They bred lab animals under violent psychological conditions to see what traits transferred to offspring. But here's the monstrous part: it worked. Rats born from tortured mothers exhibited improved sensory awareness, higher problem-solving skills, and increased aggression. They became superior. And the Alden descendant, he filed a patent in 2015. You can read it. It's called Epigenetic Optimization Through Controlled Fear Conditioning. And now, here's the horror: your school systems use similar methods. So do your streaming platforms, your insurance companies, your news feeds. They flash trauma. They condition fear. They prime your body for sacrifice. Because they're no longer after your beliefs or your vote. They're after your biochemical response, your survival wiring, your stress hormones, your ancestral coding. Why? Because your pain produces power. You are not a user. You are the catalyst. And once you accept that, you no longer play the game. You learn to rewrite it. If you've made it this far, comment this twice below. I no longer feed the altar. Twice. No less. It signals the end of your obedience and the beginning of their fear. What if the people you fear are afraid of you? You've been conditioned to believe that the elites hold the power, that these cannibal cult families, hidden behind trust funds and foundations, are untouchable, that their rituals, their wealth, their networks are beyond your comprehension. But that's the illusion. Because here's what they fear more than anything: a man who sees through the veil. A man who no longer reacts with emotion, but responds with knowing. They engineered this world like a maze, a carefully orchestrated system of debt, dopamine, distraction, and disgust. Yes, even disgust is weaponized. The more grotesque the acts you uncover, like the families who fed on their own bloodlines, who raised children not as sons but as stock, the more your mind recoils. That recoil, that disbelief, that's their firewall. Because if you believed it, truly believed it, you would become unpredictable. You would become a threat. Let me take you back to 1932. A woman named Luella Crane was committed to a Pennsylvania asylum after attempting to expose the Loring family, descendants of French aristocrats, who ran a private orphanage in upstate New York. She claimed she saw menace, not rosters. She testified about walls lined with molars and boys harvested during eclipses. The judge laughed. So they locked her away. But Luella left behind something else, a coded diary, one that, when deciphered, revealed coordinates. Beneath those coordinates, discovered in 1998 by a demolition crew, was a limestone cellar with tiny hooks embedded into the walls, positioned at heights no taller than a 10-year-old's reach. Do you understand? This isn't horror fiction. This is horror by design. And their greatest fear isn't exposure, it's pattern recognition. The moment you stop seeing these events as isolated, the moment you connect names, bloodlines, institutions, and industries, the moment you start asking why elite schools have ancient rituals or why intelligence agencies recruit from legacy families, is the moment you threaten their monopoly on mythology. Because that's what this is. They write myths about you. About your place, your limits, your value. But you were not made to kneel in a world you were born to question. You were not bred for their table. You were born to burn it. Let me tell you a secret so old, it was etched into stone before it was ever written in books. Power is not inherited. Power is not elected. Power is consumed. Every empire that ever lasted beyond a generation was built on a body count, but not in the way you think. Not just with war or bloodshed. No, the real empires, the invisible ones, fed on something deeper: submission, silence, sacrifice. You think history is a collection of facts. It's a menu. And for the flesh cult families that moved like shadows across America, everything was edible: land, lineage, law, even language. The Henderson twins in Oregon, raised in silence, trained to lure. They didn't speak until they were 8. And when they did, they recited names, hundreds of names, most of them missing persons who were never connected to a crime. The Oakmore children in Alabama, all adopted, all vanished by their 13th birthday. The parents, prominent, shielded, no charges. Why? Because every decade these families go underground. They hibernate in institutions, rebrand as philanthropists. They sit on boards, launch think tanks, start wellness retreats that charge 5 figures for transformational isolation. Do you get it yet? They turned ritual into industry. And now they don't just eat flesh. They eat attention. They eat time. They consume you through your screens, through your feeds, through your silence. You don't need to live in a forest to become prey. You just need to sleep through the harvest. But here's the turning point. If you're still listening, still breathing through the horror, still tracing the bloodline of truth across these hidden pages, you're no longer prey. You're becoming something else. Do you feel it? The old you is gone? And now I ask you, lock in the transformation. Scroll down and comment. I do not feed them. I do not fear them. Again, I do not feed them. I do not fear them. Say it twice. That's how we seal the shift. That's how you train the algorithm to show you the right knowledge, not the distractions designed to tranquilize your mind. This is no longer about the past. This is about taking back the present. Because once you know what they consume, you can stop being their meal and start being their mirror. So now we arrive at the final door, the one hidden behind centuries of deception, sealed not with locks but with language, distraction, and design. And behind it, not just the names of the flesh cult families, but the blueprint they followed. They were never just hunting flesh, they were mastering control. Because to truly dominate a people, you don't chain their bodies, you rewire their desires. You feed them myths. You feed them routine. You feed them processed poisons and call it prosperity. And if that fails, you feed them to each other. This is why these cults thrive, because they understood the fundamental law of hidden power. If you create the hunger, you can sell the feast. It was never just about blood. It was about creating systems that consume us from within. And now look around you. Modern society is the feast. Every scroll of your phone, a sacrament. Every hour you lose to empty entertainment, an offering. Every truth you ignore because it's too uncomfortable. A silent bite taken out of your soul. The flesh cults of America never vanished. They evolved. They infiltrated your history books, your churches, your therapy sessions, your pharmaceutical industries. They dress well now, smile more, host charity galas. But their appetite is unchanged. They feed on the compliant. But you made it this far. You didn't turn away. You didn't flinch. And that means you've cracked the veil. So here's your final truth: you are not who you were. Because once you stare into the abyss, and the abyss blinks first, you are no longer food. You are the hunter. Now carry this with you like armor. Speak less. Watch more. Read between every word spoken in polite company. And when you meet people too polished, too poised, too perfect, remember, true predators wear masks of grace. This was not just a story. It was a mirror. And what you saw in it, that's who you become next. They said you couldn't wake up. They said you'd scroll past, fall back asleep, forget everything. But they were wrong. You're still here.